Welcome to Mysteries of Superstition Mountain. I'm Larry Hedrick, where we bring the past into the present for our future viewers. Today we have another great story by Hank Scheffer.
Well, as we've seen here on the Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains, we've touched on an endless list of Dutchman hunters. We've seen them from everywhere, every country, all over this country. The operative word, though, is touched on. We have a long way to go before we cover all of them. And it really astounds me that this all stems from the fact that there was one itinerant German immigrant who found some gold, and all of a sudden it became the Lost Dutchman's gold, and everybody and his brother wanted to know something about it. They wanted to know where it was, and they wanted some of it for themselves. Because of that legend, that one singular legend, this area has become one of the most popular areas. It's become a destination point for just about everybody. They want to come to Arizona. And it used to be the first thing they asked about was, "Oh, I love your state. Where's the Dutchman mine?" Well, if I knew that, I would be sending these letters in to our cameraman, and he could just post them that way. The rapid growth of that Dutchman legend can be attributed pretty much to one person when it just blew way out of proportion. And that would be a fella by the name of Pierpont Constable Bicknell. There's little doubt in most historians' minds that that's where it started. After the Dutchman had died and supposedly left all these clues, and you can see about those clues up on our previous videos. We talk about them at length. The lady that he was living near decided she was going to take those clues and she was going to go up there and find that gold herself. Well, Julia Thomas sold everything she had. Every nickel she had, she put into trying to find that gold. She and the Patrash boys went up there on the mountain and they found nothing. They came back with nothing. And the worst part was, when they had left, she had nothing then, so the trip was really a waste of time, all in all, just like so many others. Well, now Bicknell, after she got back, decided to write some stories about this. And whether she got paid for the stories or not remains conjecture. I don't know. If it was me, I'd have probably wanted to get a nickel or two out of the story. But Bicknell wrote about the Lost Dutchman mine. And the thing was, it was just pure imagination in so many points. About the only thing that was really true was they spelled his name right. The other part of this was that if you paid attention to what was going on, Bicknell was writing for the purpose of getting readers for his newspapers. He wrote for several of them, the San Francisco Chronicle being not the least of which. And he was also an avid gold hunter and adventurer himself. Well, that gives you some idea what he was writing around and how far out in left field some of these stories got. Nobody wanted to believe it, and too many people today hang their hat on everything that Bicknell said. And unfortunately, they all lost that hat because Bicknell didn't know what he was talking about. Well, over these years, we've explored the escapades of pioneers and treasure hunters alike. We've had a lot of both. Unfortunately, many of the stories have all ended up with the folks involved being dead. Probably questionable at times, but nevertheless, they wound up very dead. One of the men who set the fires alight again was a fellow from Washington, D.C. who came out here. And he wound up being dead too. And that was Adolph Ruth in 1931. If you want to find out more about Adolph Ruth, you can go up on our list of videos and you can find out all you need to know about Adolph Ruth. But he wound up very dead, and it was a violent death. They found his body in one place, and later on they found his skull that had a bullet hole in it. They say he died of natural causes. Well, you get a bullet put through your brain, that's pretty much naturally going to kill you. Here again, the blame has to go to the newspaper headlines. And they echoed the story of Ruth's mysterious death in relation to Jacob Walsh's legendary gold, of course. And it seemed as though everybody with a pen or a pencil was writing stories about this Dutchman's lost mine. The story caused a temptation for so many people to just climb in their cars, they pack up and they get in the car and haul over to Arizona, and they're going to find that gold. Needless to say, by this time, Mesa and Apache Junction had become a very, very busy place. It was as if there was a star in the west, over the superstitions beckoning the unwary to her, and they came in droves. On the other hand now, not everybody who came out here was actually looking for gold, if you can believe that. You know, it didn't seem that way at the time, but there were some who were just coming out here for the beauty of the mountain and all of that wonderful Chamber of Commerce stuff. There was a fellow by the name of Yahez Clapp, whose only desire was to get away from society. He wanted to be alone, and he wanted to get right with God. That's all he wanted to do. He came out here somewhere around 1950, and he spent 12 years living in seclusion on the mountain until his mother, of all people, finally called and said she was worried about her son. She hadn't heard anything from him all that time, and normally she did. She would hear something, but at this point in time, now she was getting worried because 12 years was a long time. Well, they put the word out, and they went to searching for where they thought Jay Clapp was. Well, it took them 3 years until they finally found where he was. They found his whole body, they found his camp, they found that whole thing, and apparently he'd been dead for quite some time. Unfortunately, he's another one where they never found his skull, and the newspapers just ate that up. Well, now, having said all that, the focus of my story today is a fellow by the name of Al Morrow. In an article written by Doris Matthews, she referred to Al Morrow as a will-o'-the-wisp. And actually, I think she was a whole lot closer to the truth than what she thought she was. Yeah, I know, you're wondering, what's a will-o'-the-wisp? Well, you know, actually, you've heard the term before. But in folklore, a will-o'-the-wisp is an atmospheric ghostly light. It's a phenomenon known by a lot of different names. Some call it jack-o'-lantern. We know what that is. We see that every Halloween. They call it a friar's lantern, a hobby lantern. It's just anything that creates a light that misleads travelers by resembling a flickering lantern. And people will follow the lantern, usually to their doom. In literature, will-o'-the-wisp metaphorically refers to a hope or goal that leads somebody on to doing something they may not have wanted to do, but is impossible to reach, or something one finds strange or just sinister. In urban legends, folklore, and superstition, will-o'-the-wisp are typically attributed to ghosts. Nothing more sophisticated than that. Fairies, or elemental spirits of some sort. So there you have it. Now you know what a will-o'-the-wisp is. That and $1.25 will get you a cup of coffee pretty much anywhere. So take your pick of definition, whatever you want to use, or have the guts to talk about. We can glean a lot from Mr. Tom Collenborn because he knew so many of the people actually living in and on the mountain and visited their camps many times over the years. Al Morrow, Edwin Buckwitz, Doc Rosencrantz, just to mention a few, were up on that mountain, and Tom knew them all. Tom made several trips to Al Morrow's camp, and Al called Tom Slim, and he knew him from the Barkley Cowboy days, because Tom at that time was working for Gus Barkley out there on the ranch, so he was in the mountain quite a bit. Well, now, Alfred Erland Morrow, that was his full name. He wasn't a big man at all. He stood only 5'8", and he and Tom must have made quite a picture together, because Tom, that tall, slim guy, as he called him, was 6'2". Al couldn't have weighed more than a wet washcloth, as near as I could tell, and his skin was just scorched brown from being on the mountain. Always wore a khaki shirt and trousers and a ball cap, so you could pick him out pretty quick. To many, Al Morrow came to be known as the Good Samaritan of the Superstition Mountain. He always welcomed strangers to his camp, and he helped them along the way if they managed to get themselves lost. So he was pretty much a good guy. If you ran into Al Morrow, it was a good thing. Al Morrow seemed to be quite content with his life in the Superstition Wilderness. Well, he must have been, because he stayed up there for almost 20 years. He arrived on July 8, 1950, and stayed there until September 9, 1970. But after all that time, even then he admitted that finding gold would be a will-o'-the-wisp, even for him. Morrow's camp was in Needle Canyon between Bluff Springs Mountain and Blacktop Mesa. If you want to look that up, just Google it and you'll find out where it is. He had his oil lantern for a campsite light, and his fire always felt good if there was a cool air moving down Needle Canyon. Conversation was always plentiful, as he liked to philosophize more often than not with whoever it was that stopped at the camp. He often mentioned how people came into the mountains just to rinse the city off their souls. Al spoke of what his day-to-day activities looked like, and I'm going to read this to you because this is what he said. He said, "Besides digging, I spend time counting ants, going from one place to another for an hour each evening." The ants reminded him of people in the city walking on the sidewalks over in San Francisco. He said that he used to count people in San Francisco, true. Well, I'm sure folks called Al Morrow some other names besides the Good Samaritan, but we won't go into that. He was just a good guy. We'll leave it there. He also occupied his time twice copying the Old Testament of the Bible in longhand on notebook paper, and he only changed the wording from the Gideon Bible into the vernacular. Sounds like quite a task to me, but he did that several times. Morrow was obviously not afraid to talk about his gold search or even his tunnel. He had a tunnel that he dug. He often related that he was still digging away, which was located across Needle Canyon, a short distance from his camp. He hadn't found anything that looked like it was worth anything, but be that as it may, nevertheless, he had no plans to move. He loved it where he was, and he said it was the best campsite he'd ever had. The tunnel he was working on, and had been for many years, apparently was dug straight back into the side of a hill through unconsolidated regolith, and I hope I'm saying that right. It had no timbering to support the roof. He had nothing in there to support anything, and it gave the appearance of being a not very safe place to be. Now, for those of you that don't know, and I didn't either, what that means is the regolith is a blanket of unconsolidated, that is to say loose, heterogeneous, superficial deposits covering solid rock. That'd be like if you put sand on granite and when you step on it, you slip, it falls apart. That's what that meant. Unfortunately for Al, later on, a cloudburst, which had occurred in the mountain, caused water to seep into the roof of his tunnel. It loosened a large boulder above him, which eventually fell on him and crushed him to death. Turns out it really was more of a dangerous place than even Al thought it had been. A fellow by the name of Amos Hawkins and Sheriff's Deputy Coy DeMann had the grisly task of getting Al out from under that boulder. They'd gone into first water and then packed back in. And they got him out from under the boulder, and they brought him out. It is important to mention here that Al Morrow was not actually looking for Dutchman's gold in the first place. He was, however, convinced that Spanish gold was buried up there someplace. He had been working his same site for quite a long time, and he believed that. And you can read about some of the Spanish gold or watch our video up on Father Keno's video that talks a lot about the Spanish gold. Over the years, he had even compiled a small book, more like a pamphlet, I guess, about the Spanish mines of the Superstition Mountains. Unfortunately, the manuscript was never published, other than a short excerpt that was in Robert E. Lee's book called The Lost Dutchman Mine. That's a pretty informative little booklet. It's a fun book to read. Ironically, Albemarle had become a symbol of peace during some of the most violent years of 1959 to 1962. This was when the Jones and Piper feuded over the mining property near Weaver's Needle. They believed there was Spanish gold or Jesuit treasure there too. Albemarle could sit in his camp or in the tunnel across the wash, which he did often, listening to the Celeste Jones and the Ed Piper shenanigans raising up a ruckus. Sometimes it was even gunfire, off in the distance down there by Weaver's Needle. He was very much aware of all those, but he just wanted no parts of them. Albemarle was truly the last of the permanent prospectors to hold a long-established claim within the wilderness. With his death on September 9, 1970, an era was coming to a close. Times, they were a-changing, as they say. A lot was happening in Arizona during Albemarle's tenure on the mountain. One of the major accomplishments occurred on September 3rd, 1964. This was the Wilderness Act of 1964. This act came about because, due to the increasing population accompanied by expanding settlement and growing mechanization, Congress passed the act in order to preserve and protect certain lands in their natural condition and thus secure for present and future generations the benefits of the wilderness. That sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Some 19 years after that, the legendary superstition prospectors of today became even more controlled by regulatory means. Mineral prospecting had been completely banned since December 31, 1983. The area became a national wilderness, and administrators of the Tonto National Forest were forced to enforce the 14-day camping rule that limited people from camping out within the wilderness boundaries. That all sounds pretty ominous, doesn't it? Well, it could have been worse. To this day, we still hear all sorts of rumors about what all that means. I can tell you, when I got here the second time in 1981, there were people who were still camping out around the first water area. And I can tell you quite personally that riding out there, you could actually smell the stench from the number of people who were camped out there. There was garbage everywhere, there was trash everywhere. You could just say, and cover the whole thing with one blanket, say people just didn't give a damn. They made a mess, whether they were out there camping, trying to get away from it all, looking for gold, or whatever they were doing. They were looking for something free, and they made a mess of what was out there. It was terrible. Well, that got shut down. That was a good thing. That's what that 14-day law did. Shut all that down. So what were some of these rumors? What did it all mean? Let me run a few definitions by you, and then you can figure it out for yourself. As far as prospecting went, prospecting is the gathering of information on mineral resources, and prospecting is allowed within a designed wilderness area, but an approved plan of operations is required to do that. No person can acquire any right or interest to mineral resources discovered by prospecting or other information gathering activity. That means you can look and you can put all sorts of information together if you want to. You can look, but you can't touch and take. You can't do that. Now, fossicking, that's a funny word. Fossicking is a term sometimes used interchangeably with prospecting. However, it really shouldn't be. It's not the same. More specifically, fossicking is searching where gold has already been found, i.e. like tailings or other abandoned places where gold was known to have been found. That's what that is. So what happens if I do find gold? We get that question all the time. And I think we're probably going to have to address some of this sometime in the future. But what does happen? If I find the gold, am I free to keep it without telling anybody? Well, the answer is yes. If you find gold, you are free to keep it without telling a soul. You don't have to report it to the government, and you don't have to pay taxes on it. However, the minute you try to sell it or do something with it, all the rules change. So make sure you know the rules. Don't take the word of barroom lawyers. You'll go to jail. They won't, but you will. This public land is generally managed by either the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management. So ask them before you go in and decide you can do what you want to do, because the chances are you'll be wrong. Let me say on one final note, for some 19 years, Al Morrow searched the canyons and cliffs surrounding Bluff Springs and Blacktop Mesa. During those many years, he extracted nothing. He shared nothing of the mountain but peace, solitude, and friendship with any and everyone he met. Perhaps if people in general would have treated the mountain the same way as Al Morrow did, much of the regulatory demands would not have been necessary in the first place. Or was there something else? I'm not even going to speculate about that. You can do that all you want to, but I'm not. These all just seem to fall back into the arms with so many of the other mysteries of the Superstition Mountains. Thank you for watching this episode of Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.